My son texted me, we're cutting ties. Don't come to family dinner anymore. And the whole family group chat watched in silence. That was the message Joanna Ellis received on a quiet Tuesday morning. She was 67, sipping her green juice by the window of her Upper East Side apartment, wearing the same pearl necklace her grandmother had gifted her decades ago. The same necklace she wore at her son's graduation, his wedding, and every major family milestone. But today she was being deleted, not with a fight, not with an argument, just removed, digitally and emotionally. Joanna wasn't just a mother. She was the founder of Ellis Company, a $300 million enterprise she had built from scratch over 4 decades. What began as a modest fabric shop in Queens had grown into one of the most respected textile conglomerates on the East Coast. Her son, Brandon, had inherited the title of CEO 5 years ago. His wife, Melissa, was now the unofficial queen of family events, and apparently, the one holding the scissors. That morning's text didn't come from a stranger. It came from the very boy she once carried on her hip while negotiating supplier contracts. Now, with a single message, he was cutting her out. Joanna stared at the group chat. Not one person defended her. Her daughter-in-law replied with a laughing emoji. Her nephew left the message on read. Her sister-in-law said nothing at all. 30 years of family dinners erased with a thumb tap. But Joanna didn't cry. She took a screenshot instead. Because Joanna Ellis knew something they didn't. She'd been preparing for this moment for 3 years. And now, the real story begins. Joanna didn't rage, she didn't beg. She walked to the kitchen and opened the top drawer next to the stove, a drawer no one had touched in years. Inside was a manila folder thick with documents, notes, and screenshots. 3 years of quiet observation, of subtle discoveries. She didn't go looking for betrayal, but once she saw the cracks, she couldn't unsee them. It had started with a vendor invoice that didn't make sense. Then a charitable donation that never reached the foundation it was meant for. Then luxury expenses billed to the company under strategic development. Little things, but little things build mountains. Joanna had hired a private financial investigator under a non-disclosure agreement 2 years prior. Every month they added more proof. Every email, every receipt, every bank transfer. She never said a word, not until now. She picked up her landline, the one connected directly to a single person. 2 rings. Then a voice. Eleanor Baird, the woman answered, smooth as silk and sharp as ice. "It's Joanna," she said calmly. "I think it's time." There was a pause. Then low, knowing laughter. "I've been wondering when you'd call." "Well," Joanna replied, walking to the living room and drawing open the curtains, "wonder no more. How soon can you get here?" "For you? 1 hour." Joanna smiled. She looked into the mirror above the fireplace. The woman staring back wasn't just a mother. She was a strategist, a survivor, a businesswoman who'd built something from nothing. Her shoulders squared. Brandon wanted to cut ties? Perfect. She was about to hand him scissors so sharp he wouldn't feel the slice until it was too late. The phone on the table buzzed again, Brandon calling now from his office line. Then again. And again. Joanna didn't answer. Instead, she opened the group chat, typed one final message. Message received, loud and clear. Enjoy your last family dinner. Then she left the chat. Some bridges are burned. Others are blown up with dynamite. And Joanna Ellis was feeling particularly explosive. Eleanor arrived right on time. Joanna's doorman announced her with the same reverence one might use for royalty, and in some ways she was. Tall, commanding, with perfectly tailored trousers and heels that echoed on the marble floor like warning shots, Eleanor Baird looked every bit the woman who dismantled 2 Fortune 500 companies before lunch. "Joanna," she said, air-kissing both cheeks, "you look radiant. Revenge shoots you." "I haven't even started yet," Joanna replied. In the living room, the coffee table had been transformed into a war room. Contracts, audit drafts, timelines, and asset maps were spread out like battle plans. Joanna poured champagne. "To what are we drinking?" Eleanor asked, raising her glass. Joanna's smile didn't waver. "To Brandon's education. He's about to learn what happens when you forget who built the playground you're playing in. Eleanor leaned forward, eyes sharp. Show me what you've got. Joanna opened the manila folder. Pages of documents, unfolded bank statements, emails, fake vendor contracts, photos of Brandon and Melissa living beyond their means, all funded by Ellis Company. There were photos of Melissa carrying designer bags labeled as office supplies, receipts from hotels billed under charitable outreach, a $28,000 watch listed as a staff morale initiative, and offshore transfers, lots of them. Eleanor whistled low. This isn't just theft. This is corporate fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement. She trailed off, flipping to another page. And this, she said, holding up an annotated contract, could bury him alive. Joanna nodded slowly. For years, I let love delay justice, but love doesn't excuse theft. Not from my company, not from my employees, and not from the foundation meant to help cancer patients. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. So what's the move? I sell you my shares, Joanna said. All 49.8%. With clauses that let you audit every inch of the company and remove anyone implicated in misconduct. Eleanor didn't blink. And after that? Joanna's voice was steady, calm. We show them what accountability looks like, and we remind everyone watching that dismissing me was the worst mistake Brandon ever made. Eleanor smiled. This is going to be fun. By sunrise the next day, the first wave had already hit. Eleanor, now majority shareholder by proxy of Joanna's 49.8%, sent a formal letter to the Ellis Company board requesting immediate access to 5 years of financial records. The audit team was deployed before Brandon had finished his morning espresso. At 10:12 a.m., Brandon called Joanna again. She declined. At 10:14 he texted, "What did you mean by last family dinner?" At 10:18, "Mom, answer your phone. This isn't funny anymore." At 10:23, "Melissa is having a panic attack. Are you happy?" Joanna took a slow sip of her coffee and screenshotted each message. She labeled the folder on her desktop, Evidence, Emotional Reactions. Her phone buzzed again. "Miss Ellis, your guest has arrived," the doorman announced. "Send her up," Joanna replied. "And Marcus, no interruptions for the next 2 hours." Eleanor swept into the penthouse like a CEO arriving at a hostile takeover. She dropped her briefcase on the coffee table and opened her laptop. "Your son is in full meltdown. Legal just contacted me. He tried to block the audit with an internal vote. Too bad he forgot who actually holds the voting rights now." Joanna smiled. "He's not used to consequences. He thinks silence means submission." Eleanor leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "And Melissa? She just emailed the Charitable Foundations board claiming she had no idea the purchases were inappropriate." "Let me guess," Joanna replied. "She called that $50,000 handbag an essential administrative expense." "Exactly. Said it was necessary for donor relations." They both laughed. By early afternoon, Eleanor's team had already uncovered 2 forged vendor contracts and more than $3.2 million in questionable expenses. Joanna remained quiet, refusing every call, declining every message. She didn't need to argue. She just needed the truth to keep unfolding. By 6 p.m., Brandon had called 17 times and sent over 30 text messages. Joanna poured herself a glass of champagne, opened her laptop, and typed a single sentence into her private journal. "He told the world I was irrelevant. Today he can't function without me." And then she closed the laptop. Because tomorrow, the boardroom would become the battlefield. The boardroom was colder than usual. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Joanna arrived 5 minutes early, wearing a navy Chanel suit and the same pearl necklace Brandon had once complimented at his college graduation. Today she wore it like armor. Eleanor was already seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, flanked by 2 forensic accountants and her legal team. The rest of the board members filtered in quietly, some curious, others nervous. Brandon burst through the doors at exactly 9 a.m., his tie crooked, his face pale. Melissa trailed behind him, clutching her designer purse like a security blanket. This audit is a personal attack, Brandon said, his voice too loud. It's harassment. Eleanor didn't flinch. Mr. Ellis, she replied calmly, I now own 51% of this company. That makes me the majority shareholder. This audit is protocol. Brandon blinked. That's impossible. My mother only had 49.8%, Joanna finished for him, her voice cool. They were concerned about certain headlines. Brandon looked around the room as if waiting for someone to object. No one did. Eleanor opened a thick folder and began distributing documents. These are expense reports, vendor contracts, and banking transactions from the last 3 years, she explained, all traced back to either you or your wife. Melissa shifted in her chair. One of the documents slipped from her fingers and landed face up on the table. It showed a $28,000 charge to the Children's Health Fund used to buy a luxury watch. Brandon tried to recover. That watch was a gift for a client. Charged to a charity account? Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Creative. Joanna stood. Brandon, she said quietly, do you remember when you were 7, and you stole Mrs. Henderson's cookies and blamed the housekeeper? He flinched. You let an innocent woman take the fall because it was convenient, and I made you walk back to her house and apologize. I made you pay for every cookie. She walked toward him, each step slow, deliberate. That was the first time I taught you about consequences, but apparently you forgot. The room was silent. Today you remember. Eleanor stood and read from her legal pad. By vote of the majority shareholder, Brandon Ellis, you are hereby terminated from all positions within Ellis Company, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Brandon opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Melissa whispered something in his ear. He shook his head. She looked away. Joanna turned to the board. This company was built on integrity. We lost our way, but as of today we're back on course. As Brandon and Melissa were led out, Joanna didn't gloat. She simply sat down, folded her hands, and waited for the next agenda item. Because this wasn't revenge. It was restoration. The fallout was swift. News of Brandon and Melissa's removal spread through the company like wildfire. Some employees cheered quietly in their group chats. Others cried relief more than sadness. For many, it felt like the end of a long nightmare. 3 days after the boardroom showdown, Joanna hosted a private lunch at a quiet midtown restaurant. Her guests, 3 former department heads who'd either resigned or been pushed out under Brandon's leadership. I thought you moved to Florida, said Janet Mitchell, the former HR director. That's what Brandon told everyone, Joanna replied calmly. Apparently I was also diagnosed with dementia. The women looked at each other, stunned. He told us you weren't mentally capable of handling business decisions, said Sandra Bell, former finance director. He used that to justify restructuring us out, added Leah Coleman, who once ran the company's outreach programs. Joanna set down her tea. You weren't restructured, you were silenced. Then she pulled out her notebook and slid it across the table. I need your help. We're rebuilding the company, not just the numbers, the soul. They looked down at the page's proposals for ethical leadership, employee oversight committees, transparent bonus systems. And I want you back, Joanna said, with full authority, no strings, no politics. There was a pause. Then Janet smiled. Why now? Joanna's voice didn't shake. Because I let love blind me. I let loyalty to my son get in the way of loyalty to what I built. That won't happen again. Sandra reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You didn't fail us, you were deceived too. Leah wiped a tear. And now you're leading. Joanna exhaled, the first full breath she'd taken in years. That afternoon she sent Eleanor a single message. The team is coming home. By the end of the week, Ellis Company wasn't just recovering, it was transforming. With every unethical policy reversed and every silenced voice welcomed back, Joanna wasn't just reclaiming a business. She was reclaiming her name, her values, her legacy. And it was only the beginning. They tried one last time to stop her. A lawsuit, filed quietly by Melissa's family lawyer, accused Joanna of elder abuse and coercion. The claim? that she'd been manipulated into selling her shares while under emotional distress. Joanna laughed when she read it. "They're saying I was too emotionally fragile to make legal decisions," she told Eleanor over breakfast, "but somehow strong enough to orchestrate a hostile takeover." "It's a contradiction so ridiculous it might help us," Eleanor replied, sipping her coffee. "The media loves irony." And so, they gave the media a show. 2 days later, Joanna stood at a podium in a navy pantsuit, the city skyline glowing behind her. Journalists packed the press room. Cameras rolled. Her voice was steady. "I've been accused of being mentally unfit," she said, lifting a thick folder of documents. "These are the records I personally collected over 3 years. Evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and betrayal." The room hushed. "I may be 67. I may enjoy early morning walks and crossword puzzles. But I am not confused. I am not weak, and I am certainly not someone who disappears quietly." Laughter rippled through the crowd. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal raised her hand. "Mrs. Ellis, what do you want people to take away from all this?" Joanna looked directly at the camera. "That family doesn't give you a free pass to steal. That love should never require silence. And that dismissing someone based on age or gender is a mistake you make only once." The footage aired nationwide. By that evening, Ellis Company was trending, not because of the scandal but because of the woman who refused to stay silent. Melissa's legal team withdrew the suit the next day. Federal prosecutors filed charges against Brandon and Melissa 2 weeks later. And Joanna? She returned to the office with her shoulders straight, her head high, and a name that now meant something again. Not just a businesswoman. A force. The kind of woman people no longer underestimated and never forgot. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. Ellis Company had not only survived scandal, it had risen from it, stronger than ever. Under new ethical leadership, the company's value surged past $400 million. Employee satisfaction hit a 5-year high. 3 major clients who had cut ties under Brandon's tenure quietly returned. Joanna now chaired every board meeting. She wore the same pearl necklace no longer as armor, but as a reminder of everything she'd fought for, of everything she'd reclaimed. Across from her at the board table sat Leah, Sandra, and Janet, no longer victims of a corrupt regime, but leaders in their own right. The company launched a scholarship program for young women in business, fully funded by assets recovered from Brandon and Melissa's illegal spending. The irony? The handbags Melissa bought with stolen funds were auctioned off. The proceeds paid for 50 full scholarships. When Forbes interviewed Joanna for a feature titled, "The Woman Who Rebuilt Her Legacy," they asked if she had any regrets. "Just one," she said, "that I didn't act sooner. Every day I waited, someone else paid the price." At home, she found quiet joy in weekend coffee with her grandson Logan, the one person who'd never doubted her. "Grandma," he said one morning, "Professor Hines wants to use your case in our corporate ethics seminar." Joanna smiled. "Tell him yes. The next generation should know that silence isn't strength and kindness isn't weakness." That afternoon, Eleanor called with one final twist. "Brandon wants a meeting." Joanna looked out at the city skyline, soft in the golden light. "To apologize," Eleanor added. "To make amends, he says." Joanna considered this carefully. "Tell him he's welcome to apply for a job at the foundation like everyone else. If he's changed, we'll see it. If not, he'll remain exactly what he chose to become." "And what's that?" Eleanor asked. Joanna didn't hesitate. An irrelevant chapter in a much better story. That evening, as she sipped wine and read thank you letters from scholarship recipients, Joanna felt it deep in her bones. Peace, not just from justice served but from knowing she had created something better from the ashes. And that, in the end, was the real revenge. Saturday mornings had become Joanna's favorite time of the week. Logan arrived at 10 sharp, balancing coffee, croissants, and a backpack full of ideas. He always took the same seat, far end of the leather sofa, legs curled under him, eyes bright with purpose. "Grandma," he said, pulling out a thick folder, 3 more family-run businesses reached out to Columbia this week. They want help setting up governance protocols, transparent systems, internal checks. Joanna raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me corporate ethics is trending?" Logan grinned. You're trending. You've basically become the blueprint for how to turn betrayal into a business model. Joanna laughed, setting aside the scholarship applications she'd been reviewing. It was true. The Wilson Foundation, named not for her maiden name, but for the grandmother who taught her grit, had become a hub for young entrepreneurs building with integrity, sustainable startups, ethical tech, fair pay fashion, the kind of future she once only dreamed of seeing. Later that afternoon, Eleanor texted with news. Netflix had greenlit the documentary. The title? Joanna Ellis, The Woman Who Wouldn't Disappear. Joanna read the words twice, then smiled. Brandon had tried to erase her. Instead, he'd made her unforgettable. Looking out over the city, Joanna felt something rare and full, not just satisfaction but clarity. She didn't miss Brandon. Not really. She missed the version of him she thought was real. The son she believed she'd raised. The family she'd imagined they could be. But the truth? Some relationships don't deserve reconciliation. Some endings are necessary for new beginnings. And the woman she had become, the leader, the mentor, the force of nature, was only possible because she had chosen herself. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Joanna opened her laptop one last time. She clicked into a folder labeled Legacy, updated a few notes, then closed it. Not out of fear, but because the story was complete. To anyone watching, listening, or living through something similar, know this. You are not weak for being betrayed. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. And you are not alone for choosing peace over proximity. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, share it. Leave a comment, subscribe. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming impossible to ignore.